So when people think about wizards, they often think of their spellbook. They think of mages going and collecting and gathering as many spells as they can, and this is their source of power. However, for a wizard, it's also their greatest weakness, and this build really capitalizes on that. So now, trust me when I say that a wizard's power comes from their spellbook, and from my personal experiences, when my wizard ended up helping take down an evil wizard cult, I got so many spellbooks after that arc. And I remember during the downtime, my character was literally writing down spells for a solid 2 whole sessions. It was amazing. I think I even doubled the amount of spells my character had in his spellbook. But the point that I'm trying to get to, wizards, the unscrupulous ones at least, are constantly trying to figure out what other wizards are doing, trying to take their spells, trying to grow their own library, trying to beat other wizards in duels. And this is a build that I made to really capitalize off this mechanic. A character that excels at stealing spellbooks and materials from other wizards and then gaining that power for themselves. And now there are 2 different paths that you can take this build, and of course I'll explain both of them. So for this first part, to get started, you should aim to go either custom lineage or variant human, of course. You know how this plays out. We're going to grab us a fancy feat that we can use to buff us and the overall concept of this build. And personally, I think the flavor works really well for Mage Slayer. Your main target is going to be mages, and using this, you can really make them suffer. For your stats, focus on getting your intelligence and dexterity as high as you can with a decent constitution too. And so to start with this build, you'll want to go wizard, and that is pretty self-explanatory. You can't really get a whole lot of use out of the spellbooks you take if you don't have a spellbook to put your own spells into. And with wizard, it's very important that you take cantrips like Green Flame Blade and Booming Blade. And even Shock and Grasp too, which we're going to get into a little bit later. And personally, with this strategy, I think the Abjuration, War Magic, and Bladesong subclasses will be the best fits for this build. Each of these subclasses offers you some great in-combat resilience and utility as well. War Magic and Abjuration are fantastic with their counterspell features, which can really shut down an enemy mage's magic. And Bladesong offers you some increased synergy with your high intelligence and dexterity. And after you feel like you've gotten a few decent levels of wizard under your belt, then we switch over to fighter, and that's when the fun really starts. Now, as far as we need to go into fighter, we just need 3 levels, and even if you're really not feeling the 3 levels, we can actually stop at just first if we really wanted to. If we stop at 1 level of fighter, we'll get some nice armor proficiencies and weapon proficiencies too. But the big reason why we want to step into fighter in the first place is for the fighting style superior technique. And what we want to do with this fighting style is take the maneuver Disarming Strike. The reason why is with this maneuver, if the target fails a strength saving throw, you can force them to drop 1 item that they're holding. And now let's look at this for a second. Wizards most of the time dump strength. Making a wizard roll a strength saving throw is going to be brutal for them, especially if you spec very high into dexterity. When it comes to maneuvers, your DC for said maneuvers is tied to your choice of either dexterity or strength. Although in this case, we're choosing dexterity. So now, we can attempt to make our target drop 1 item they're holding. And while many would think, oh, yeah, I get where this is going, just have them drop the spellbook and dip. You can do that. Although there's this strong chance that they'll just be able to chase after you, give you the magic bonk, and get their book back. But what you can really do to mess up a mage is use Disarming Strike and then have said mage drop either their Arcane Focus or their Component Pouch. And what this means is that the wizard can't cast any spells that involve a material component. All they can do is use spells with verbal and somatic components. And now, let's say if a wizard found every wizard class spell in the game and put it in their spellbook, that's over about 300 spells. And of those spells, over 200 of them require a material component. Through this little maneuver alone, you've prevented a wizard from potentially casting about 2/3 of the spells that they have at their disposal. And seriously, look up a wizard spell right now, any of them. There's a good chance that that spell you looked up has a material component. And then, now that you've knocked their stuff out of their hand, then with your free item interaction for that turn, you pick up your newfound Arcane Focus or Component Pouch and stash it somewhere very secure on your person. And then smack that wizard who's lost a great deal of their utility. And this is where we start unloading our own spells, and even our cantrips too. The reason I mentioned spells like Booming Blade and Green Flame Blade is because of their melee abilities, and they also synergize with our Battle Master maneuvers too. And weirdly enough, Shock and Grasp is actually a really good feature because it can negate a target's ability to take reactions. and this is going to be very good for shutting down wizard spells like Counterspell and Shield. And you might be asking yourself, okay, but is that actually really helpful? If I'm a wizard who, in theory, has been looting from other wizards, wouldn't I just want to use some really big spells that I have in my own kit? Yes, you would, because those are important. You spend a lot of time getting them, so you should definitely use them. However, the reason why Shock and Grasp is such an important feature on this build is because of counterspell wars. A wizard, or at least a good wizard, will always have a backup plan, and if they feel like they're getting their butt kicked a little too hard, they will have some means of trying to escape. Maybe they'll try to pop a greater invisibility spell, a dimension door, or some other means to try to escape once they feel like the battle is a lost cause. And normally, you'd want the ability to counterspell their attempts to escape. However, if you try to counterspell them, they can try to counterspell your counterspell, hence negating your negation. And then they escape. It sounds silly, but by relying on abilities like Shock and Grasp, the target loses their reaction, which then prevents them from using Counterspell, which then gives you the ability to basically trap a mage in combat with you and preventing them from having too many realistic outs. And something else I really like about this build too is that as we go and level up our character, we'll be able to not just have this really weird, fun mage looting mechanic, but we'll also still be able to get 9th level spells too. And even if we took only 1 level of fighter to get the superior technique instead of going 3 levels into fighter, battle master fighter, we can actually get the spell mastery feature as well. So we're really not missing out on some really cool late game wizard stuff. And as I was saying before, if you do want some more maneuvers, those extra 2 levels of fighter for the battle master superiority die do really help. You'll have less ability score improvements overall to contribute to your intelligence and your dexterity for your maneuvers too, so that's kind of the trade-off there. But the fun part is you have the ability though to pop more than 1 disarming strike maneuver per fight, instead of just the one that you use in hopes that it manages to outdo the wizard. So just keep that in mind. Even too, with how frail wizards typically tend to be, you don't really need to spec too high into dex. You just need to make sure it's decent enough that your spell save is strong enough that they're likely going to fail when that wizard makes a strength saving throw. But other than that, just keep going intelligence. But you should be fine with your weird wizard looting strategy. Due to how frail wizards are, you really don't need to spec too far into dexterity to bump up your DC. All you really need to do is just make it a decent enough score that the DC is high enough that a wizard is likely going to fail it. And then other than that, just work on your intelligence and getting as many spells as you can into your book. Now that we've gone over this part, I'd now like to introduce the alternate route to this build. So previously we had our mage looter going more wizard than fighter, and now for this we're going to be going more fighter than wizard. Particularly we're going to be focusing on battle master to get more of our lovely maneuvers and superiority die, and then we're also going to be taking the ritual caster feat. What this lovely little feat does is it allows us to slowly build up our own kind of spell book by finding and gathering ritual spells, which of course we can and will loot from wizards. So of course, if you want to be a fighter with some more flair and flavor, then I'd recommend going this route specifically. Although just keep in mind, it will potentially be a bit more feat heavy. In the previous aspect of this build, we talked about only taking the Mage Slayer feat, and we should definitely still do that here if we have the opportunity. But in addition to that, we'll also likely need to take the Ritual Caster feat too. But thanks to us being a fighter, we'll likely max out our important stats early on with all of the ASIs we'll just get from being a fighter. Even too, if you wanted, you could go a couple levels of wizard just for that extra flavor and utility. I'd say really no more than 3 levels. With this, you get 2nd level spells, you get a magical tradition, and this way you're not taking too much away from your key fighter levels. And looking over both of these builds, let's see how they hold up. Our more wizard-focused build will definitely let you get more spells and be able to cast more spells overall. It's a bit more gimmicky, not gonna lie. It's also this really weird mix of gathering a bunch of spells that you use your intelligence modifier for, but then also really needing to rely on your dexterity or strength to be maxed out in order to get any real leverage with your disarming strike maneuver. And even at that, you really only have a few tries with this maneuver. Only one if you decide to dip only 1 level into fighter, or take the Martial Adept feat instead of going into Battle Master for those 3 levels. In addition to this, you'll also be less tanky and less resilient than just going in the full fighter. However, you'll have much more utility by going as deep into Wizard as you can. And then with the fighter Ritual Caster route, you'll still be able to get a ton of ASIs, and there's more flexibility within the build and a surprising amount of out-of-combat versatility. However, you would miss out on the high-level spellcasting, and there aren't a whole lot of spells that you'd be able to get with your Ritual Caster feat. So once you find those wizard spells, you're probably going to be out. But that whole process of finding those spells and then putting them in your spellbook is really what makes the whole journey of this character special. But anyways though, that's all the time that I have for this video. If you enjoyed it, then please like the video and subscribe for even more D&D content. And in the meantime, keep smiling, keep scheming, and I'll see all of you next time.